Very good afternoon. You're listening to South Asian and ethnic radio station across Southampton, broadcasting on 101.1 FM. I am Lily Aurora, and this is the Community Hour in which we always get to meet guests who have inspirational stories to tell us. And today my guest is Don John. Don has worked extensively around equality and diversity issues. Don also works as a consultant with a variety of public bodies and private companies, including the Army, Navy and Police in England and Northern Ireland, helping them to develop policies and practices around equality and diversity. Don, as I found out, is multifaceted. But first, let's find out all the life events which brought my today's guest, Don John, here to the present. Welcome to my show.
Thank you, and good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you. So let's start with your parents first.
My parents, right? Well, my parents came to the UK in 1948 from a little place called Sierra Leone on the west coast of Africa. And my dad was an engineer, my mother was a teacher, and they came here for, as they say, a better life.
Okay, so did they think England is what they thought it would be?
Well, the streets weren't paved with gold, that's for sure. And of course, at that time, black people in the UK had expectations, but of course they faced racism and discrimination, and they weren't able to pursue the things that they were professionally qualified for. But that's a story repeated with many migrants. But they made their life here, and we lived in London. And, I had brothers and sisters, and we had a relatively good life.
So I gather you were born in London.
I was born in London in Paddington General Hospital.
Okay.
I wasn't Paddington Bear, though. But,
you would have liked to be?
Oh, well, he's more famous than I am, that's for sure. But, Paddington, northwest London is the part of London that I'm most familiar with. And I went to school in London, in that part of London, and I had a great time.
So do you remember anything about London at all when you were growing up in that part, and what was the the environment like at the time?
Yeah, well, I lived on a council estate in Harlesden, and of course we were, I think, the only black family on the estate, which I think we're the first black family on that estate. There weren't that many black people in Harlesden at that time, and it was pretty early, and of course. We had friends, but we faced the normal thing about being the only different face in the community. It was the time of teddy boys, and you're too young to remember teddy boys. Teddy boys were kind of like, they were young men who were kind of like quite violent towards anybody who was different.
But the name is so cute.
Yeah, teddy boys. Teddy boys sounds like they're really nice and cuddly,
yeah.
But they weren't cuddly at all. Trust me. But they used to obviously intimidate people, and if you were black and you stood out, that happened. But it wasn't all bad. I mean, there was a lot of lovely people that we met and made friends, and that was the early part when I was a kid. But as I grew older in the sort of secondary school and all the rest of it. I went to a grammar school.
Okay, but what about your early years, like as a primary school?
Primary school, you know something? I can't really remember too much of that.
Okay.
We went to something called, I'm trying to remember the name of the school. I think it was Oxford Road or something like that. And I really remember very little about that, apart from the fact that we were different to everybody else, but nothing spectacularly bad ever happened.
Mm-hmm.
And of course my dad at that time was working, I think, in the post office. And
so obviously he didn't take up the job he was qualified for.
No, he wasn't able to get a job in that area. And basically, our parents, well, my mother was at home bringing up kids, but my father just did work to get the money in. Mm-hmm. And he was a hard-working man, but he faced some disappointment because not being able to realise, his qualifications and do the work he was supposed to do, obviously, it left some element of frustration.
So did he found it challenging to work at a post office? I'm assuming it was all different people working there, or it was very people from different cultures were working there?
Not that many, because remember, we're talking about the early 50s. There weren't that many people of other colours and backgrounds there, so mainly working with white people. But he found some friends there. My mum was at home, bringing up the kids, and so. But I guess it was a a lonely experience.
Especially for your
people.
mom, looking after kids
Well-
and no friends of her own in a way she would have wanted.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I've got 5 other brothers and sisters, and we were all born 1 year apart.
So that kept her busy.
That kept her very busy, and it was challenging. I think.
So what about your grammar school?
Grammar school. Well, we then moved from Harlesden to a place called Dollis Hill, which is a little bit. It's still a council house, but it was a house, not a flat.
Okay.
And it was a little
So
bit
more
posh.
spacious and
Yeah, more spacious and whatever. But still, we were the only black family in the street. We all seem to be the only black people anywhere we go, but we were the only black family in the street. And it was a lot of people living there were from the Jewish community, which was quite interesting. So I made a lot of friends in the Jewish community there. And I then went to grammar school, something called Kilburn Grammar School, which was, a bus ride away. And it was, the funny thing, you see, is my dad always wanted each of us to go to a different school.
why is that?
I think he felt that we needed to develop individually without necessarily having any kind of like sibling support. And
So in that sort of atmosphere where you're the only black family, perhaps the only black children in a school,
yeah,
wow, that's something really, to think in that manner, that, to have
well,
children in different schools.
well, yes, and my sister went to a place called Bronsbury in Kilburn High School, which was literally a girls' school opposite Kilburn Grammar School. And Kilburn Grammar School was it was kind of a posh kind of school, actually, really, and it was. I enjoyed it actually because I was always in the library all the time, because
So you were a nerd, were you?
I was a little bit of a book nerd. I always had because not only did I go to the library at the school, there was a library in a place called Craven Park in Harlesden that literally myself and my brothers in particular, we were always in there. Because the thing about libraries is that when they had libraries back in the day, is that it was an escape from the real world.
Yeah.
So we were there and just taking books out and reading books and staying there. That's why my eyes are so bad now. We read so many books, but it was a nice, warm experience, and I really enjoyed secondary school.
So do you remember your favorite teacher at all who made an impression on you?
I don't actually. I do remember some teachers who were not very nice. We always remember those. But no, there wasn't any one particular teacher who thought, oh, this person inspired me or anything. No, not really. But I made some good friends and I enjoyed my time there.
So do you remember any sort of misconception your friends had about you, particularly the white family, or kids had about you,
Well, one thing I do...
which you had to break, or you were like, you were like shocked? How could they think like that?
Well, I do remember that there was actually one other black person in the school during the 6 years I was there. And the weird thing is that his surname was also John, but he wasn't related to me at all. The funny thing, he used to hang around with, because if you're the only kid there, people make little remarks and comments.
Yeah. So you hang out together, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I didn't hang out with the other John. He didn't want to know.
Oh, really?
No, because he was kind of... The funny thing is sometimes when you have 2 or 3 black people in the same environment, sometimes they don't want to associate with each other because they don't want people to think they're the same. I don't know if you've experienced that, but certainly sometimes it's almost a feeling, well, I've carved out a space for myself. Don't you get in my way,
Don't you get in my space?
You get into my space. Now, I am the number 1 black person here, so you can't enter my space. So it was kind of a weird thing.
I would think that, they would mentor you, or you would, you'll have a support system going on.
No, that didn't happen. Mind you, it could have been that time. We're talking here about, the 60s, swinging 60s and swinging London.
Oh, yes.
But that was great. I love swinging London.
So do you remember your favorite subjects at all while studying? And did you have any interest in, studying? I know you were in the library, you said a lot.
Yeah. I think history was a subject I really enjoyed, and English literature. I loved English literature, and I read all the classics. I read, Shakespeare and Dickens and all that stuff. My brother was a bigger nerd than I was. He in fact read the Bible, the whole thing from back to front. How he did it, I don't know. But books. Reading books was kind of like really, really inspirational, you know.
So did you have any role model from your book jumping out to you and saying, hey, you got to do this, or inspiring you?
Not really. I mean, in the early part of my teens, I think that I was always interested in classical literature, and my brother was even more so, because my brother he liked, you know, Greek and Latin and ancient history and stuff like
Wow.
that. And in fact, he went to Oxford afterwards, and that's what he studied there. But I was interested in that in the early years. But later on, I kind of became a little bit more radical, and I started reading. I know, terrible thing. And I started reading stuff about, you know, the American Civil Rights Movement, all that went with that. And I read some amazing books which have influenced me all my life. You know, books like The Autobiography of Malcolm X, Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver.
I read that too, actually.
Yes. Oh, really? Yeah, it's a brilliant book. Soul on Ice, Eldridge Cleaver. Bobby Seale's book about the Soledad Brothers, and Angela Davis, of course, the great. I just love her. You know. In fact, I saw her in London a couple of months ago, when she talked to the Royal Festival Hall. So these books were just really. It made me really conscious of the whole issue of race and civil rights.
So, but you're in your secondary school and then you decide to go to college?
Well, interesting thing is
Or
that...
you sort of diverted to something else?
Well, my dad always wanted all of us to go to separate universities. He still have this thing.
Also?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so it's going on.
It's going on. So I think my sister, my older sister, went to Holborn College. She studied law, became a solicitor. But somehow or the other, I was a bit different. Because my younger brother went to Oxford, as I said, and did sort of ancient Greek and all that kind of stuff. But I did not want to do that. So I actually did not go to university. I went out to work.
Straight away. So how old were you then?
I must have been about 18, 19. I went to work in a solicitor's firm off Regent Street for a bit. And then I went to work in
So they just took you because you were just secondary school, out of secondary school?
Yeah, I was a clerk, basically, at the solicitor's office.
Were you making a lot of tea?
I was making loads of tea, yeah. and then I applied for a job in the civil service.
Okay.
And I joined a place called Her Majesty's Treasury.
So did you clear the civil services?
I cleared the civil service.
Do you need to give an exam for that? Or?
Yeah, I think I did some qualification thing.
Okay.
And I started working in the Treasury as a clerk. And that's where the Chancellor of Exchequer was, and everybody else. Chief Secretary, Financial Secretary. And so I started working there as a clerk, and then I worked my way up to an executive officer.
So how was the working environment like there?
Well, you know,
for a young lad of 18, 19,
18, 19, well, yeah.
Swinging 60s.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I was down the road from Oxford Street, Regent Street, and
heart of London.
Oh, it was fantastic. You know, the Beatles were big and all the rest of it, and you know, it was swinging London in those days. And lunchtime, I used to sort of go up to Charing Cross, and it was a fantastic environment. And when I worked in the Treasury was connected to the Foreign Office at that time, so you could walk from the Treasury through to the Foreign Office, down the stairs into 10 Downing Street.
Okay.
Which I did to go to lunch, but now you can't get anywhere near 10 Downing Street. So I used to do that. But working in the Treasury was again, it was a revelation, because I then ended up working in the Parliamentary Office with a guy called Dennis Healy, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time. So I was working in the private office, collecting information and sort of walking between the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and Whitehall and Parliament Street. And it was very exciting.
So you were just plodding along, life unraveling in front of you, you. And did you have any plan, or you said, "Oh, I'm young, I want to make money and have so many girlfriends, have good dinner or whatever, and have a house by 25, and have 3 kids, and etc. etc."
None of that was in my planning. My planning was I was working there in the Treasury, and I guess the expectation is that I would rise up, get promoted, then I'd become like, parliamentary secretary to whatever. But my life had changed by my exposure to other issues related to civil rights. And I got a little tired, and I said, there's no way I want to spend the rest of my life doing this. So I thought, well, I've got to leave the country. which I did. And I was going to go to...
So what was the trigger for you to do that?
The trigger was the fact that I guess I was becoming more aware of the condition of black people in this country.
So while you were also reading a lot, you continued and getting influenced by all the authors and...
Well, absolutely.
At the same time,
Yeah.
and you decided that working in the office was not suitable to
It
you.
didn't suit me, but the funny thing is that I was the only black person there, and when I first started in the Treasury, they said to me there was one other black person who was working there, and if I knew them. Yeah, that's because we all know each other, don't we? And I said no. He said his name was L. Brown. I said L. Brown, and I said no, I don't know him. But evidently it was L. Brown who was the lead singer of Hot Chocolate.
Okay.
You remember the band Hot Chocolate?
Well, you should have made your business to know him.
Yes, I know, but he left just before I came. And the second black person who came when I was there was a guy who really influenced me. His name was Linton Kwesi Johnson. He's a poet, and he became very influential in the Black Panther movement and a variety of different things. And he became a recording artist as well. And he and I were the only two black people there. And together we wrote poetry together. But he's now a famous poet, but his poetry was better than mine. And I went to meetings with him in Brixton because he was a member of the South London Black Panther Party.
While you were working in the office?
While I was working in the Treasury. So we wrote poetry together, went to the poetry meetings, and he left to go to Goldsmith, and I stayed there. Then I thought, what am I doing here? So I decided to go abroad, and I went to Trinidad for 6 months, and I wanted to go to a country that was essentially controlled by black people.
So what were you thinking? What were you thinking you're going to achieve by going to Trinidad?
A greater self-awareness of myself, which I did find. And
You did find.
And also for me to be able to reflect on what I wanted to do with the rest of my life.
Were you feeling uncomfortable, or there was something niggling your way that you wanted to go and discover yourself?
Well, working in a place where it was, the height of British establishment, as exciting as it may have been, and living in London and working in London in the swinging 60s, I felt there was another part of myself that I wanted to discover. And going to Trinidad helped me to do that. And I stayed there for 6 months, had a fantastic time. And while I was there, I said, well, I've got to change my life.
So what were you doing there? You were staying with your relatives, or
I was staying with friends of friends.
Okay.
And I was staying on the east coast of Trinidad and Port of Spain and San Fernando. But then I thought, I've got to do something different. And I was interested in race relations, so I then applied for jobs when I was over there.
Okay, hold that thought.
Okay.
We are in Trinidad. I would like to remind our listeners you're listening to Unity 101, and I am Lily with this exciting conversation with Don John, and we are in Trinidad now, aren't we?
We're in Trinidad now, in San Fernando. And I applied for jobs in the UK, and I wanted to be part of a body that was dealing with race equality. So I then applied for a job in Southampton Council for Racial Equality. And this was in
So why Southampton?
Well, I applied for Ipswich first because the jobs were available. There were vacancies available. And Ipswich, I either wasn't shortlisted or there was something not right with it. Southampton was the second choice.
Okay.
So I applied for one in Southampton, and I got an interview. I came back home. My mum and dad said, "Well, you've got an interview there." So I went to the interview, and
But your mom and dad were living in London.
Living in London, yeah. So I came back from Trinidad to London. And I got the job, and I landed in Southampton in 1977.
So that was the first sort of job you really liked and you wanted to do?
Yes. And essentially it was working with young people. I was an education and youth officer, and I spent a lot of my time working with kids in Graham Road, at the Graham Road Youth Club.
Okay.
And that was fantastic. That was really good.
So did you find any different from when you were growing up? Did you find...
Oh, yeah.
Tell us.
Yeah, vastly did. Firstly, I was operating and living in a black community, which I wasn't before. I mean, because firstly, you know, when I was living first, we were the only black people there. We were the community, you know. And then obviously I was living mostly in a Jewish community and now living in a black community.
So you were sort of mentoring them. What sort of work were you doing with them? Or
Well, basically sort of just giving them the opportunity to appreciate the qualities of their life. And there was a bunch of people who I then formed into a group called Ebony Rockers.
How young were they?
They were 16, 17, 18.
So very impressionable age.
Oh, yeah. And I formed them into a band and they learned their instruments and we won a big competition in London and we got a contract with EMI. And they became Ebony Rockers and the father of one of them is Craig David's dad, Georgie. So I'd like to think, and some of them are doing some really good stuff now. So I guess part of my job was, as a community relations officer, giving them the confidence to be able to believe in themselves. And I did some of that. But also I was, you know, fighting inequality in the city, which, you know, which was all about.
So I also know. Yeah, I also know you're also founder of Black History Month in Southampton.
Yes,
which has now been established, as we all know, as a core event of the city and very progressive. So tell us the thought behind it, and you know what you wanted to achieve with it.
Well, when I was working in the council as the diversity and race officer, I kind of felt that, well, this was an opportunity for us to be able to discover our history but share it with the city, because I felt that perhaps the city had not recognised the relevance and importance of black communities in its makeup. And therefore we started fairly humbly by registering the fact that Black History Month is in October and started to do a couple of things with the council. And the council gave me the opportunity to be able to start to celebrate it in the context of Southampton.
So all this was happening, the record, you were mentoring the young black people, kids, and then this was happening at the same time while you were working in your in Southampton as a first job, your Southampton community officer.
That's right.
Okay.
But at the same time, I'm also an independent race and diversity consultant. So I was doing work in different parts of the country and with different organisations, training them on what they used to call in those days race awareness. Race awareness. They don't like it anymore these days, because they think they're all aware now, don't they?
So do you think you've achieved what you set out to achieve with this Black History Month?
With Black History Month, that's gone from strength to strength. Now,
in what way?
Well, people now know what it is. People now are more aware of the relevance and of the history of black people and the manner in which it's contributed to their lives. I mean, even important things like black people inventing things like the traffic light, black people inventing blood plasma for hospitals, black people sort of being great authors. I mean, I always quote The Three Musketeers, the film, the play, the book. It was written by a black man. And people don't know that, you know?
So do you think, I know you've mentioned all of this, do you think there are a lot of role models missing from the black community for black kids? I mean, you know, you have rappers and singers and athletes, maybe athletes, but in terms of literature or science?
Absolutely. We are always quoted as experts in sports and music, and there's some great sports people and musicians who are black, but very rarely are we, you know, sort of promoted in terms of other more intellectual pursuits that black people have been involved in. And so we like to do that as well, but still recognising, you know, the fact that, you know, we got, you know, great sports people. In fact, my great role model back in the day was Muhammad Ali, because he was more than a sportsman. He was actually, you know, a great man. He was a great politician. He was a great social activist. And so sports people and musicians do have a role to play in being able to kind of like provide, you know, role models for black people, but also role models for all communities as well.
Absolutely. And so because I was referring to in terms of education for the black community, you know, the science and the inventions and so on and so forth. So you also co-authored a book called The Black History of Southampton, 16th century to 21st century.
Yes.
What made you pen this book?
Well, firstly, because all the work I was doing, I was talking about the relevance of black history, and I thought, well, one day, why don't I try and capture the essence of that in a book? So I sort of I worked with a woman called Stella Muirhead, and together we put that together. I started it, and she gave me some good background information relating to all the other contemporary things that were happening in the world, so you could actually contextualize chronologically the things that black people did and what else was happening in other parts of the world and the UK. So I put that out, I can't even remember how long ago that was now, but it's sold pretty well. It sells pretty regularly because people from outside of the city don't actually even know there's a black community here.
So you're a man who wears many hats.
I've got lots of hats, yes. Many hats.
So let me tell our listeners, you're listening to Unity 101, and this is the Community Hour, and I'm having a great conversation with Don John here in the studio. So let's go on to your personal side now a bit.
Alrighty.
So tell us about, let's have a dope on your personal life.
Right. Okay. Well, I got married in 19. My wife would kill me if I don't remember this straight away. But I got married in 1983, and it was fantastic. I met a lady called Sharon, and she lived in Cranberry Avenue. Sharon Richards was her name at the time. She lived in Cranberry Avenue, and we met, and I met her in a few events and whatever. So I got married in 83, and we got 2 kids. Who are now quite grown up. One's Dana, she lives in Bristol, she's 31 I think, and my son is 27, he lives in Southampton, and my daughter's got 2 children, one is Alexia, who's 8, and Rocco, who's 2. He's a little bit of a rascal. So 2 grandkids, they all live in Bristol.
So how did you feel about raising your children, considering the fact that when you were young at their age, you were reading all these books? Did you provide them with the same sort of atmosphere, or they sort of swerved to another direction altogether?
Well, we did provide our children with a consciousness of who they were, and also the capacity to feel proud of who they were, because if you're a black or Asian person living in a white community, there are many things that diminish sometimes a little bit notions of your own self-worth, particularly when there's very little to commend people who are like you in terms of things that they've done. So sometimes parents have got to go out of their way to provide positivity about their own race, and we try to do that in terms of literature we provided, conversations that we had, acknowledgements of things that were taking place in the world, and I guess a sort of a contextualization of things that may seem bad on the surface, but a further explanation of why they were as they were.
I don't know whether I should ask you, why do you think there isn't a sense of ownership with the ethnic communities versus the white community?
Ownership of?
In the sense that, I've arrived, I'm doing this, and this belongs to me, I'm going to have a great life, the world is there for me to do things.
I think it's mostly because many of the things that make a city what it is are not terribly well represented with people of other races and ethnic backgrounds.
Okay.
If you look at the way in which the city is governed, look at the way in which the city is represented in major organisations, there are relatively few black, Asian or other ethnic minorities representing the city. In fact, most people outside of Southampton would not think of this city having a black and ethnic minority community. In fact, they'd be shocked and they'd realise that there were black people. And I'm always surprised a little bit is that there are many things that contribute to the wealth of the culture of the city that are contributed by black and Asian people.
And we at Unity 101 is certainly contributing towards it.
Absolutely, but it is not recognised in the full way that it should be. Because I always think, well, when people go on about Newtown, Nicholstown and the Derby Road area, but, it is the most multicultural, multi-ethnic place in the whole county. It speaks a whole variety of different languages, it has a whole variety of different cultures, and it has a whole variety of different influences. Why isn't Southampton proud of it as something that represents the city? Well, I can only think of one reason, which I won't say just yet.
Okay, so what do you think you have most of? Talent, intelligence, education, or persistence?
What about, I think, persistence, because that's important. Because no matter how talented you are, if you're not persistent, then you're not going to get anywhere.
So how is that helped you in your life?
Persistence has been very important, because sometimes you do a job of work that you know may not necessarily be valued by other people, and there will always be obstacles put in your way. Because when it comes to the business that I deal with, which is racism and anti-racism, then we know that there will be many people and organisations that will not want to be called out in terms of the way in which they operate or not operate in relation to that. So, on the one hand, you've got to balance an element of diplomacy, and on the other hand, you've also got to have a balance of not letting go of the things that you want to achieve. And so it's striking that balance is quite important. But sometimes you've actually got to be tenacious, which may be interpreted as aggressiveness. Because as you know, or as you may or may not know, anytime a black or Asian person is tenacious, it's seen as aggression. So we've got to be very careful how we actually sort of use those particular qualities. So,
as I mentioned that you wear several hats, you're also in entertainment industry, isn't it?
Yes.
You're a filmmaker.
Yes. We formed something called the Black and Asian Video Panel many years ago, and there were a bunch of us who we kind of felt that the way in which black people were represented was poor. And this was back in the early 90s, late 80s. So we said, well, why don't we make our own films? Because then we don't have to depend on other people representing us. So we formed this Black and Asian Video Panel. There's about half a dozen of us, and we decided to make our own films. The first one we made was called The Colour of Love, which I'm very proud of. The Colour of Love was a film about mixed-race relationships. And we shot it in a studio called The Gantry. The Gantry Theatre was an alternative theatre at the back of the Mayflower, and a great theatre. And so we
So you conceptualized, you had a director,
Yes.
a cinematographer?
Yep, all black people.
Okay.
The director was black, the camera people were black, and then we invited a multiracial audience to talk about the issue of mixed race relationships, and fantastic. It was absolutely brilliant. And we then
So where is that movie? When was it telecasted?
It was out on social media, for whatever that was at that time. It's on YouTube at the moment.
Okay.
And it was our first attempt to do something ourselves. We distributed the finished film to friends and colleagues.
Are you doing anything to re-promote it, or?
Well, we did something about 5 years ago. We did The Colour of Love Revisited, and we brought back all the original people who were talking about their relationship. We brought them back.
I remember Unity 101 was also doing something with youth.
That's right, yes. So we brought the same people back and filmed it again. And we filmed it at the university this time.
Probably with much more modern technology.
Oh, absolutely. And it was interesting because some of the... Jim Baker was on that in the early days. And Jim was saying certain things, and we brought Jim back again, and it was really very good. And we got Craig David involved as well.
Okay.
And Craig sort of did some stuff with us in the making of that film. And again, that's on YouTube as well, so people can catch that one. And then we made several other films, but we probably didn't have time to talk about the detail of that. But the films we made were great. And part of that time, I also was involved in something called the Cultural Diversity Group to the Media, which means we sat with the BBC and the ITV and the Echo and various people, advising them about the way in which they represented or not black people on their platforms.
So, what are the benchmarks, and how do you think they should be representing black people?
Well, I think firstly they must walk away from the old stereotypes of how black people are represented, and they should really. Well, there are two things. One is they need to ensure that there's a representation of black people in their workforce, which doesn't happen as much as it should do. But also they need to decide on what are the issues and the subject matters that they need to think about when determining the schedules of what will be broadcast.
And also the kind of people they're broadcasting in plays and films and stuff, because it seems like a caricature of ethnic communities sometimes.
Well, it is, but we've got to realise the limitations that local television has of productions they're in control of. Very often with local productions, it's the news. Local news is what they very often only control, apart from the isolated documentary that they may do. Okay. So the news slots are probably the most important slots to get some influence on.
Oh, is that so?
Oh, okay. Yes. Because remember, most of the other things they show on TV is controlled by, the central people. And there are very few productions by local companies.
Even then, I find caricatures a lot, isn't it?
Oh, yes, there are. Because particularly, obviously...
Particularly in Asian community.
Well, I mean... They will always promote Diwali and Vaisakhi. We know that, But will they promote, for instance, if they're talking about, let's say, gardening, would they bring sort of a black or Asian person to give their views about gardening? I don't know. They may think it's not something they're particularly interested in. But it has changed.
Oh, that's a thought.
But it has changed, actually. So I remember they did something about a year ago in which they were talking about bikes. And about, teaching young people to get on their bikes. And they actually interviewed, I think it was a Sikh woman in the precinct. And that was unusual because they normally would not do that, because they wouldn't see that as an opinion that was, an appropriate one to get from somebody who is not supposed to be part of the normal community.
So what's a typical day like now?
For me?
Are you still in this scenario of whatever you're doing?
Of race? Yeah, I certainly am.
No, that is going to be a part of your life. I'm thinking till you hang your boots. Or not even hang your boots.
Yeah.
Take it to the up and above.
The thing is, I am so busy. I mean, I've got an exhibition out at the moment, which is on at the university, the Showcase Gallery. And it is called Rebel Music, the Story of Blues Parties and Shebeens in Southampton. And we've done an exhibition that talks about Newtown, Nicholstown, and the manner in which shebeens and illegal parties were a very strong part of the culture of the local community. There's some great images there, and also what the social and political scene was at the time, because of course it was the red light district, and there were issues around the police and racism and discrimination in various pubs and clubs. So I think if anybody has an interest in the local area, they should go and see it. So I'm doing that, and I'm doing a lot of work for the university.
Are you sort of attached to schools and, sending out relevant information as well?
Oh, yes, I am. In fact, I think last week I was at the Muslim school on Hartington Road. And I'll tell you what, the kids must have been like 7 or 8, but they were absolutely fantastic. And they were asking me, saying, "Oh, Don John, tell me about this, tell me about that," and they had a real opinion about what was going on. Oh, what's black history? Why do black people not like white people? And the kids were fantastic. They really were. And we do stuff in other schools, particularly more with secondary schools. Do a lot of stuff with St George's School, sometimes Cantel. So yes, we like to involve them in Black History Month in particular as a kind of an opportunity to really kind of get them stimulated about that issue. But I believe we can do more with schools, because at the end of the day, they are the future. Sounds like a cliche, but we really need to ensure that they're invested in the kind of things we want to promote.
So what kind of philosophy do you live by?
Philosophy is that, you've got to treat other people in the way you like to be treated yourself. And also I think that we've got to, as black communities, we've got to be a little bit more self-conscious of who we are, because some of us, we are not a community anymore, we're individuals. And I think...
Could you elaborate a bit more?
Well, I think particularly more with the black community, the African Caribbean community, are now spread out far more across the city than perhaps, the Sikh and the Muslim communities and the Hindu communities. So it's more difficult for us to create a greater cohesion of who we are. And this is why the study of our history is the one thing that binds us all together. And we need to do more with that. I think it's different, like with the Sikh community, because, they have the Gurdwaras and they meet as communities more regularly, equally with the Hindu community and the Muslim communities with the mosque.
I think they just go there, eat and come back.
Yes, but they still go there and meet, and that doesn't happen with the African Caribbean communities. And it may not seem like much, but it's actually more than people think it is.
Okay, so you think you should have some certain meeting arrangements once a month or once in 6 months, something
Not
like that?
necessarily, but I think we need to share a commonality about who we are. I'm not sure whether that is happening now as much as it used to. And I think not having a geographical space and place diminishes the possibility of that happening in the future.
So what's your best piece of advice given to you, longer journey, and did you take it seriously or you just said, oh, that's not for me, I do what I think is right for me?
The best piece of advice, gosh.
If not, that's fine. And tell me if you have given any good advice to anybody and somebody who followed it through.
Well, I can't remember the best piece of advice given to me. A lot of people have given me some good advice. But I think the best advice I give to anybody, particularly to somebody who is black or African or Caribbean, is to be yourself, Don't try to be somebody that you're not, because society will always want to make you more in their image, as it were. Be proud of who you are and what you are, because there are so many ways in which, society and sort of political pressures will try and deny you as a person of colour, for instance, because now we have societies where there are more people of mixed race as well, which is a good thing. But there again, I mean, it creates difficulties in people being able to determine their identity.
So do you think the ethnic minorities are feeling the pressure from their own community as well as from the outside?
Yes, they are, without a doubt. And I think sometimes there's a pressure for communities to want to regress a little bit and to push the outside, further outside, because there are great social and political pressures now. We have things that don't work for us. I personally believe it all started with 9/11 and then 7/7 and then the wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan and then the refugee crisis and then Brexit. All of these, I think, have impacted on our desire to kind of be ourselves, and also the pressures about people having preconceptions about who we are. The latest refugee crisis is a great example of that.
So what do you think is the most important thing and what has stayed with you? Most important thing in terms of living a good life, and what has stayed the same for you from where you started off till now?
Oh, that's a big one, that one, isn't it?
That's to end my show, isn't it? So
what has stayed with me? Well, I think one thing that has stayed with me is the fact that I don't really think I've changed a lot from the 1970s to now in terms of my convictions. I found an old video of myself giving an interview in 1979 at the University of Southampton. And most of what I've said, I could have said today. And that is unfortunate, because it demonstrates that a lot of stuff really hasn't changed.
Yes, if you think about it.
It's all in black and white as well.
And it is black and white.
I must send you the link to that video. It's on YouTube now. And it's 1979.
Not a bit of colour in it?
No colour in it.
Oh dear.
No colour in it. It's black and white, and I could have said it today.
And it's also black and white what you're doing, isn't it? It's still the same
It's
thing.
still black and white. There's a greater conscience of black and white as much as there was back in the day.
Don, thank you for being a guest on Unity 101.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
It was a pleasure to have you on my show to share your story with our listeners. You're tuned to Unity 101, South Asian and ethnic radio station, broadcasting from the heart of Southampton on 101.1 FM and online on www.unity101.org. 24 hours a day. Please stay tuned. It's drive time follows. It's goodbye from me, Lily. Have a lovely afternoon.